The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets outside the modest ranch house on the edge of Willow Creek, a forgotten town where the wind howled like a lonesome wolf through the bare cottonwoods. It was Christmas Eve, the clock ticking past 7 in the evening, and the air inside carried the faint scent of pine from a wreath Sarah had hung years ago, now faded and dusty. Sarah Harlan, 42, with lines etched deep around her eyes from too many sleepless nights, stood in the dim kitchen light, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled eviction notice. Her husband Tom had been gone 3 years now, taken by a heart attack that hit like a freight train while he was fixing the roof in a summer storm. He'd left her with a mortgage they could barely afford and a promise whispered in the dark. "If anything happens to me, we'll make it right. The club will watch over you." The knock at the door was sharp, insistent, like knuckles rapping on a coffin lid. Sarah wiped her eyes and opened it to find Mr. Hargrove, the landlord, bundled in a wool coat that smelled of cheap cigar smoke. His face was a mask of indifference, eyes darting past her to the sparse living room where a single string of lights flickered weakly on an empty wall. No tree this year, no gifts wrapped under it. "Time's up, Mrs. Harlan," he said, his voice flat as the frozen ground outside. "You've missed 3 months. I can't keep carrying this. Pack what you can and be out by midnight." He thrust a cardboard box into her arms, as if that would contain the fragments of her life. Sarah's breath caught, a sob rising in her throat. She thought of the photos on the mantel, Tom in his leather vest, grinning beside his motorcycle, the Iron Oath patch gleaming on his shoulder. He'd been a biker through and through, riding with the Iron Oath crew, a band of rough-edged men bound by codes older than the roads they traveled. But after his death, the calls had stopped, the visits dwindled to nothing. Maybe they'd forgotten, or maybe grief had walls too high to climb. Now, with the bank breathing down her neck and winter closing in, she was alone. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking like thin ice. "Just until after the holidays. Tom's club. They promised to help." Hargrove snorted, turning away into the swirling snow. "Promises don't pay rent, lady. Be gone by morning, or the sheriff gets involved." She sank to the floor as the door clicked shut, the eviction notice fluttering to the worn linoleum. The house, once filled with the rumble of engines and laughter from backyard barbecues, now echoed with silence. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows on the snowdrifts, and distant carols from a neighbor's radio mocked the emptiness. Sarah pulled her knees to her chest, the cold seeping through the thin walls, and let the tears come. How had it come to this? A widow on the streets, her dreams of a quiet life shattered like the ornaments Tom used to hang so carefully. But in the distance, cutting through the storm like a beacon, came the low growl of engines. Not the smooth purr of sedans, but the thunderous roar of Harleys, a convoy slicing the night. Headlights pierced the blizzard, 20 bikes strong, their chrome flashing under the sodium glow. Leading them was Ethan Rook Caldwell, a towering figure in weathered leather, his beard streaked with grey, and his eyes sharp as the knife tucked in his boot. Ethan had ridden with Tom for 2 decades, brothers in arms forged in the fires of lost wars and barroom brawls. They'd shared a foxhole in the desert once, promising under starlit skies to have each other's backs forever, no matter the miles or the years. Ethan had gotten the call that afternoon, a nagging voice in his head that wouldn't quit. Tom's widow, Sarah. He'd heard whispers through the grapevine, rumors of hard times. As the club gathered for their holiday ride, passing out toys to kids in the shelters, Ethan's old promise resurfaced like a ghost. "We look out for our own," Tom had said, clapping him on the back after a close call on the highway. Ethan couldn't shake it. He revved his engine, signaling the crew. Men and women who'd patched his wounds, shared his grief, built a family from the wreckage of their pasts. "Change of plans," he'd barked over the wind. "We're riding for Sarah, Tom's Sarah." The bikes pulled up in a semicircle, engines idling like a pride of lions, snowflakes melting on hot exhaust pipes. Hargrove, who'd lingered in his truck to watch the spectacle, froze as Ethan dismounted, his boots crunching the fresh powder. The air hummed with the scent of gasoline and leather, the club's patches catching the light, iron oath, a symbol of unbreakable bonds. "Evening," Ethan said, his voice gravelly but steady, extending a gloved hand that held an envelope thick with cash. "Heard there's a debt here. Rent's covered. 3 months plus a little extra for the trouble." Hargrove's eyes widened, glancing at the bikers fanning out, their faces set in quiet determination. No threats, no raised voices, just presence, solid as the mountains. Sarah stepped onto the porch, her coat pulled tight, disbelief etching her features. Ethan turned to her, removing his helmet to reveal scars from a long-ago crash that Tom had pulled him from. "Sarah," he said softly, the wind whipping his words. "Tom made me promise. Said if he couldn't be here, the oath would. We're late, but we're here. And this?" He nodded to the truck bed, where 2 prospects unloaded a towering pine, strung with lights that twinkled like stars against the night. The crew sprang into action, silent and efficient, hauling the tree inside as if it were a sacred relic. Strings of bulbs unfurled, ornaments clinking softly, remnants of Tom's collection passed down through the club. Laughter broke the tension, a young rider named Lucas stringing garland while his partner Grace arranged wrapped boxes under the branches. Sarah watched, tears freezing on her cheeks as the house filled with warmth. The eviction notice lay forgotten in the snow, trampled under heavy boots. As the first lights flickered on, bathing the room in golden hues, Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "This ain't just for tonight," he murmured. "Tom's legacy rides with us. Your family, Sarah. Chosen, not born." Outside, the engines revved once more. A salute to the promise fulfilled echoing into the storm. But as the night deepened, shadows lingered, whispers of why the club had stayed away so long and what darker forces might still threaten this fragile peace. For in the world of the Iron Oath, redemption was a road paved with old wounds, and the ride was far from over. The warmth from the fresh pine branches seeped into the living room like a long-forgotten embrace, the scent of sap mingling with the faint tang of engine oil that clung to the bikers' jackets. Sarah stood in the doorway, her bare feet cold against the threshold, watching as the Iron Oath crew transformed the empty space. Lucas, a wiry prospect with tattoos snaking up his arms like desert vines, wrestled the tree into a stand by the window, his breath puffing in the chill air that snuck through the cracks. Grace, his wife and the club's unofficial medic, knelt nearby, her nimble fingers untangling a strand of multicolored lights, their soft glow reflecting in her eyes, eyes that had seen too many roadside rescues, too many brothers pulled from wreckage. Ethan lingered by the fireplace, his massive frame casting a shadow that danced with the emerging lights. He hadn't said much since the envelope of cash changed hands, but his presence filled the room, a quiet anchor amid the bustle. Hargrove had slunk away into the night without another word, his truck's taillights swallowed by the swirling snow, but Sarah could still smell the cigar smoke on her coat, a bitter reminder of the eviction's sting. She wrapped her arms around herself, the thin sweater doing little against the draft, and stepped closer to the tree. Ornaments dangled now, glass baubles etched with faded initials, a tiny motorcycle charm that Tom had carved himself from scrap metal years ago. "How did you—" she started, her voice a whisper lost in the clink of hooks and the low murmur of voices. Ethan turned, his scarred face softening under the holiday glow. "Tom kept a box of these at the clubhouse," he said, his gravelly tone cutting through the noise like a well-tuned exhaust. "Said they were for hard times. We should have come sooner." There it was, the weight of unspoken regret hanging between them, heavier than the snow piling on the roof. The club had drifted after Tom's death, fractures forming like cracks in frozen asphalt. Ethan had buried himself in runs to the border, hauling supplies for veteran shelters, avoiding the ache of empty chairs at meetings. Whispers had spread. Some said the oath was cursed, that Tom's heart attack was no accident, tied to old debts from a smuggling bust gone wrong. Others blamed the law, sheriffs sniffing around the garage, looking for excuses to shut them down. Loyalty had frayed, promises tested by the grind of survival. But tonight, under the relentless fall of flakes outside, those threads pulled taut again. Noah, a broad-shouldered veteran with a prosthetic leg from the same war that had bonded him to Tom, clapped Ethan on the back as he hung a star atop the tree. "Rook's right," Noah rumbled, his voice warm as fresh coffee. "We let the miles come between us, but blood, chosen blood, don't wash away." Noah had been the one to spot Sarah's name in a faded newsletter from the local aid office. A quiet nudge during the club's toy drive. He'd ridden point on the convoy, his bike sidecar loaded with the tree they'd chopped from clubland at dawn, needles still dusted with frost. Sarah sank into the sagging armchair by the hearth, the fabric worn from years of Tom's weight. The room hummed with life now, Grace humming a carol off key as she plugged in the lights. The tree bursting into a cascade of color that chased shadows from the corners. Boxes appeared from saddlebags, simple gifts wrapped in newsprint, a wool blanket for the bed, canned goods stamped with the club's insignia. Laughter rippled as Lucas fumbled a string of tinsel, sending it fluttering like confetti, and for a moment Sarah glimpsed the backyard barbecues of old, engines idling while Tom flipped burgers, the air thick with smoke and stories. Yet beneath the cheer, tensions simmered like embers under ash. Ethan stepped outside for a smoke, the porch creaking under his boots, and Sarah followed, drawn by the need to understand. The snow had eased to a gentle drift, blanketing the yard in silence, broken only by the distant chime of wind against the eaves. "Why now?" she asked, pulling her coat tighter. 3 years, Ethan. I called the clubhouse after the funeral. No one came." Her words carried the bite of betrayal, sharp as the winter wind. He lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in his calloused hand, exhaling a plume that twisted into the night. "Guilt," he admitted, eyes fixed on the horizon where the town's lights blurred into darkness. "Tom saved my hide more times than I can count. That crash on Route 9, shattered femur, road rash like I'd been dragged through gravel. He carried me 2 miles to help, promised we'd retire together, ride easy." Ethan's voice cracked, the scar on his jaw tightening. After he went, I thought, maybe the oath was paying for our sins, old run-ins with the law, favors called in wrong. Grove's tied to that. Word is, he's in deep with the county commissioner, squeezing folks like you to fund their games. Sarah's breath fogged the air, her mind racing to the eviction notice, the fine print about municipal liens that never made sense. "So this isn't just about rent," she pressed, the warmth inside now feeling fragile, like a flame against the gale. Ethan crushed the cigarette under his heel, snow hissing around it. "It's about the promise. Tom made us swear to protect what's ours. But Hargrove's not done. He'll push back, call in favors. We've got your back now, Sarah. All the way." He placed a hand on the porch rail, the wood groaning softly, as if echoing the burdens they all carried. Inside, the crew gathered around a makeshift table, folding chairs dragged from the garage, passing a thermos of spiked cider, stories flowing like the liquid warmth. Grace pulled Sarah into the circle, her grip firm and sisterly. "You're not alone anymore," she said, eyes gleaming. But as the clock struck 10, a low rumble echoed from the road, not engines but the crunch of tires on ice. Headlights pierced the dark, slow and deliberate. Hargrove's truck, or something worse? The bikers tensed, hands drifting to pockets, the holiday light casting long shadows that whispered of battles yet to come. Redemption wasn't a single ride. It was a convoy through the storm, and the night was young. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The headlights sliced through the veil of snow like accusatory fingers, casting erratic beams across the snow-blanketed yard. The crunch of tires on ice grew louder, deliberate, pulling the warmth from the room as if the storm itself had turned hostile. Inside, the Iron Oath crew froze mid-conversation, the thermos of cider hovering forgotten in Noah's grip. His prosthetic leg shifted slightly under the table, a soft scrape against the floorboards that echoed the sudden hush. Grace's hand tightened on Sarah's arm, her medic's instincts kicking in, eyes scanning for threats amid the twinkling lights. Lucas rose slowly from his chair, his wiry frame coiling like a spring, while Ethan stepped back to the window, peering through the frost-laced glass without a word. Sarah's heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against her ribs, the fragile joy of the evening fracturing like thin ice underfoot. The tree's glow seemed dimmer now, its ornaments swaying gently from the draft sneaking under the door. She'd known Hargrove's type, small-town power plays, the kind that crushed folks like her under the weight of unpaid favors and whispered deals. But this felt bigger, the air thickening with the scent of impending trouble. Gasoline fumes from the idling bikes outside, mixing with the pine sap in a way that turned her stomach. The vehicle pulled to a stop at the curb, engine rumbling low before cutting off. Doors slammed, 2, maybe 3, and heavy footsteps approached, muffled by the snow, but purposeful. Ethan motioned the crew to stay put, his broad shoulders blocking the doorway as he cracked it open. Cold rushed in, carrying the metallic tang of exhaust and something sharper, like tension uncoiled from a spring. "Evening," Ethan called out, his voice steady as a revved idol, gravelly from years of shouting over wind and roar. From the shadows emerged Hargrove, flanked by 2 men in ill-fitting sheriff's jackets, their badges glinting under the porch light like cheap tin. The landlord's face was flushed, not from the cold, but from whatever fire he'd stoked in his retreat. "This ain't over, Rook," he spat, the name slipping out like he'd rehearsed it, eyes darting to the bikes lined up like sentinels. "You think a wad of cash fixes everything? Sheriff's here to enforce the law. Mrs. Harlan's got till dawn, but with company like yours." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the convoy, his breath fogging in the frigid air. The deputies shifted, hands resting on belts, but their postures screamed reluctance. Small-town hires, not eager for a scrap with a crew like the Oath. Ethan stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sealed the warmth inside. Snowflakes caught in his beard, melting into droplets that traced the scars on his cheek. "Law's clear," he said evenly, pulling the envelope from his pocket again, though it was empty now. "Rent's paid in full. You got your money, walk away." Hargrove sneered, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a crack in the bluster. "That cash? Tainted. Club like yours. Smugglers. Troublemakers. Commissioner's got eyes on you. This widow's tied to old Harlan's messes. Debts don't die with a man." The words hung heavy, laced with insinuation, stirring the ghosts Ethan had tried to bury. Tom's death, whispers of foul play, a heart attack too convenient after he'd refused a shady haul for the county's underbelly. The Oath had steered clear, fearing the noose tightening, but now it coiled around them all. One deputy cleared his throat, a younger man with a face too soft for the uniform. "Mr. Hargrove, we ain't here for a fight, just to serve notice if the rent's settled." He trailed off under Hargrove's glare, boots shuffling in the snow. Sarah watched from the window, her breath shallow, the room behind her a cocoon of light and quiet voices. Grace murmuring reassurances to Lucas, Noah's hand steady on a chair back, ready if needed. But this wasn't about fists. It was a test of promises. The kind that bound men like Ethan to oaths carved in blood and chrome. Ethan's jaw set, the wind whipping his jacket like a flag in battle. Tom Harlan was clean, roads straight even when the roads twisted. You squeeze his widow? That's on you. But touch her home again, and the oath rides as one. It wasn't a threat, just truth, delivered low, like the rumble of an approaching storm. The deputies exchanged glances, the older one nodding subtly toward the truck. Hargrove's face twisted, but he backed away, muttering curses that dissolved into the flurry. "This ain't the end," he called over his shoulder, climbing into the passenger seat as the engine growled to life. Tires spun briefly, spraying slush, before the vehicle retreated into the night, taillights fading like dying embers. Ethan stood there a moment longer, the cold seeping into his bones, before turning back. The porch light caught the fresh snow on his boots, crunching as he re-entered. The crew exhaled collectively, the tension easing like a clutch released. But Sarah saw the weight in his eyes, the old wounds reopening. "They're gone," he said simply, hanging his jacket by the door, the leather steaming slightly from the warmth. Grace poured another round of cider, the liquid glugging softly into mugs, and the circle reformed, stories picking up where they'd left off. But now they carried an edge. Tales of close calls on desert runs, favors called in the dead of night. Sarah joined them, settling beside Grace, the blanket from the gifts draped over her lap like a shield. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan across the table, her voice threading through the low laughter. He met her gaze, the tree's lights reflecting in his eyes like distant stars. "No thanks needed. Tom's promise is ours, but Hargrove's words, they're poison, means we dig deeper tomorrow. For you, for the truth." As the clock edged toward midnight, the snow outside thickened again, blanketing the world in hush. The crew shared quiet toasts, ornaments clinking like glasses, the house alive with the hum of chosen family. Yet Sarah felt the undercurrent, the road ahead twisting through shadows of corruption and buried secrets. Redemption wasn't a single night's ride. It demanded vigilance, loyalty tested in the cold light of dawn, and as carols played faintly from a radio in the corner, the oath settled in, engines silent but hearts revving, ready for whatever the holiday storm might bring next. Noah leaned forward, his voice a rumble over the crackle of the fire they'd kindled in the hearth, logs from the club's stash, smelling of pine and earth. "Remember that run in 18? Tom pulled us out of a ditch, rain pounding like fists, swore we'd never leave a brother behind." The story unfolded, drawing nods and half-smiles, weaving the past into the present. Lucas added his piece, voice boyish but steady, about stitching wounds in a roadside tent, Grace's hands guiding his. It was therapy in motion, mending frayed edges under the holiday glow. But outside, the wind whispered warnings, carrying echoes of Hargrove's retreat. Sarah touched the motorcycle ornament on the tree, its metal cool against her fingers, and felt Tom's presence, not gone, but riding shotgun in the souls who'd come. The night deepened, promises glowing brighter than the lights, a beacon against the encroaching dark. For in Willow Creek, justice wasn't served by badges or banks, but by the unbreakable chain of honor, link by link, mile by mile. The fire popped and hissed in the hearth, sending sparks dancing upward like fleeting stars against the soot-blackened chimney. Sarah's fingers lingered on the motorcycle ornament, its etched lines rough under her touch, a talisman from a life that felt both distant and achingly close. The room wrapped around them like a worn leather jacket, warm, familiar, edged with the faint creak of settling wood and the low murmur of voices weaving tales from the road. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the window panes with a mournful howl that carried the scent of fresh snow and distant pine. Midnight had come and gone, marked only by a soft chime from the old clock on the mantel, its hands frozen at some long-ago hour Tom had meant to fix. Ethan sat across from her, his massive hands cradling a mug of cider that had gone cold, steam long since surrendered to the chill seeping through the walls. The crew had thinned slightly, Lucas and Grace stepping out to check the bikes, their footsteps crunching away into the night. But Noah remained, his prosthetic leg extended toward the fire, the metal gleaming faintly in the firelight. He'd launched into another story, his voice a deep baritone that filled the spaces between the flames' crackle. That night in the Badlands, round 15, Noah said, eyes distant as if tracing invisible routes on the ceiling. Tom spots the ambush before we do, cops waiting with lights off, tipped by some rat in the county. He veers left, draws them off, buys us time to scatter. Ride straight, he yells over the engines, saved the whole run. Sarah listened, the words pulling at threads of memory she'd tucked away. Tom's laugh booming like thunder after a storm, his hands calloused from wrenches and throttles, gentle on her shoulder during quiet evenings. The Iron Oath hadn't just been a club, it was his anchor, a brotherhood forged in the grit of veteran halls and midnight rides, where promises were currency stronger than cash. But after his death, the silence had been deafening, a void filled only by bills and the echo of unanswered calls. Now, with the trees' lights casting golden pools on the threadbare rug, she felt the pull of that old bond, fragile yet unyielding. Ethan set his mug down with a soft thud, the sound cutting through Noah's tale like a break on gravel. Tom didn't just save runs, he said, his gravelly tone laced with the weight of unspoken miles. He saved souls, mine included. That promise in the desert, under those stars that felt close enough to touch, we swore it'd hold. Family first, no matter the cost. His eyes met Sarah's, scarred and steady, reflecting the fire's glow. There was regret there, etched deeper than the lines from wind-whipped rides. For the years, the club had let distance erode their vigil. Whispers of corruption had kept them away. Hargrove's ties to the commissioner, a web of small-town graft that ensnared widows and veterans alike, squeezing until nothing remained but echoes. Noah nodded, rubbing his knee absently, the prosthetic a silent testament to battles past. Hargrove's no lone wolf. Word from the garage. He's leaning on folks for protection fees, funneling to the sheriff's slush fund. Tom's death? Too neat. Doc said heart attack, but we all know the stress of dodging those snakes wore him down. The air thickened, the cider's warmth turning sour in Sarah's throat. She'd suspected as much, piecing together Tom's late nights, the hushed arguments about old favors that turned his face to stone. The eviction wasn't random, it was a thread in a larger tangle, pulling at the oath's edges. A sudden gust battered the house, the door straining against its frame, and Grace burst back in, snowflakes melting in her hair like tears. Lucas followed, his face flushed from the cold, breath clouding as he shook off his jacket. "Bikes are fine," Grace said, her voice brisk but edged with caution. "But there's movement down the road. Another set of lights. Slow. Could be nothing, or—" She trailed off, glancing at Ethan, who rose without a word, his chair scraping like a warning. Sarah's pulse quickened, the blanket slipping from her lap as she stood. The tree's ornaments swayed, catching the firelight in a kaleidoscope of color that suddenly felt mocking against the encroaching dark. "What now?" she whispered, the question hanging like smoke. Ethan moved to the window, parting the curtain with a thick finger, his silhouette blocking the glow. Outside, the snow swirled in eddies, blurring the horizon, but faint headlights flickered through the haze, approaching, deliberate, not the erratic spin of a lost driver. "It's the commissioner himself," Lucas muttered, peering over Ethan's shoulder. "Saw the plate on that truck earlier. Hargrove must have called in the big guns." The crew gathered, a quiet formation born of instinct, hands loose but ready, eyes sharp. Noah levered himself up, the fire casting long shadows that danced like adversaries on the walls. Grace touched Sarah's arm, a grounding pressure. "Stay back, we've handled worse." Ethan turned, his expression a mask of resolve, the beard framing a jaw, set like forged steel. "This ends tonight, no more shadows." He stepped toward the door, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and the others fell in behind. No fanfare, just the solid rhythm of loyalty in motion. Sarah followed to the threshold, the cold air nipping at her skin, carrying the bite of exhaust and unresolved fury. The headlights grew brighter, resolving into a black SUV that pulled up with a skid, doors opening to reveal Hargrove once more, this time with a slick-haired man in a tailored coat. The commissioner, his face pale under the porch light, eyes darting like a cornered animal. "You bikers think you own this town?" the commissioner barked, his voice amplified by bluster, stepping forward with Hargrove at his heel. The deputies from before flanked them, hands on holsters, but the oath's presence loomed larger, engines idling faintly in the distance, a low thunder promising unity. Ethan halted at the steps, snow crunching under his boots, the wind whipping his jacket like a banner. "We own nothing," he replied, voice low and even, cutting through the gale. "But promises, those we keep. Tom's widow stays. Your games end here." The commissioner sneered, but hesitation flickered in his stance, the snow muffling his threats into hollow echoes. Hargrove shifted uneasily, the cigar scent clinging to him like guilt. Sarah watched from the doorway, heart hammering, the warmth inside a fragile barrier against the storm. This wasn't just eviction, it was reckoning, a clash of corroded power against the unyielding chain of honor. Words flew sharp and sparse, accusations of illegal funds met with Ethan's steady gaze, the crew a wall of quiet strength. As the argument peaked, a distant siren wailed, "Back up or bluff," and the commissioner backed toward his vehicle, face twisted in frustration. "This isn't over, Rook. The law's on our side." But his retreat was swift, tires spinning slush as they fled into the night. Ethan watched them go, breath steady before turning back. The crew exhaled, the tension uncoiling like a release throttle. But Sarah saw the resolve harden in their eyes. Dawn was hours away, yet the road stretched longer, demanding more than lights and cash, truth unearthed from the cold earth of secrets. Inside, the fire welcomed them back, flames leaping higher as if fed by their return. Stories paused, replaced by plans whispered over mugs, scouting the commissioner's ties at first light, calling in old allies from the veteran network. Sarah sank into her chair, the ornament now warm from her grip, a symbol of endurance. The oath wasn't just riders, they were guardians of forgotten vows, their loyalty aflame against the winter's bite. But as the wind died to a whisper, the house settled into watchful quiet. The promise of morning bringing not just light, but the shadows it would chase. If you enjoyed this chapter, please hit that like button. It helps spread these stories of redemption and courage to more corners of the world. The first hints of dawn crept through the frost-etched windows like hesitant fingers, painting the living room in pale greys and blues that softened the edges of the trees' lingering glow. The fire had burned low overnight, reduced to a bed of glowing embers that whispered soft pops into the quiet, carrying the smoky scent of charred pine logs. Sarah hadn't slept. How could she? With the weight of the night's standoff pressing on her chest like an unyielding saddlebag. She sat curled in the armchair, the wool blanket from the crew draped over her shoulders, its coarse weave a reminder of hands that had woven it during long club vigils. The house creaked occasionally, settling under the snow's burden, while outside the world lay hushed. The storm's fury spent into a blanket of white that muffled even the wind's sigh. Ethan stirred from the couch where he'd dozed fitfully, his leather jacket rumpled beneath him like a makeshift bedroll. He rose without a groan, joints protesting silently from years of hard miles, and crossed to the kitchen, the floorboards sighing under his weight. The faint clink of a coffee pot on the stove broke the stillness, followed by the rich, bitter aroma that filled the air, chasing away the night's chill. Noah was already up, methodically cleaning his prosthetic with a rag from his pocket. The metallic scrape, a rhythmic counterpoint to the brewing. Lucas and Grace had crashed in the spare room, their soft breathing a steady undercurrent from down the hall. But Ethan knew sleep was fleeting for them all. Shadows of the commissioner's threats lingered like exhaust in the rear view. Sarah watched Ethan pour 2 mugs, steam curling upward in lazy spirals, and joined him at the scarred oak table where they'd shared cider hours before. "You think they'll come back?" she asked, her voice a threadbare whisper. Fingers tracing the rim of the mug, he slid her way. The liquid burned her tongue, grounding her in the moment, but the question hung heavy, laced with the fear that had rooted deep since Tom's passing. Ethan leaned back, his scarred hands wrapping around his own mug like anchors. "They will. Men like that don't fold easy. Hargrove's just the front wheel, Commissioner's the engine, greased by kickbacks from every dry county line." His eyes, sharp under the grey-streaked beard, held hers with the steady resolve of a man who'd stared down worse than small-town snakes. He paused, the coffee's heat rising between them, and delved into the underbelly they'd skirted all night. Tom knew. Last run before he went. We were hauling meds for the shelters, clean work, but the commissioner tried to hijack it, divert for his funds. Tom stood firm, told him the oath rides for the forgotten, not the fat cats. Next week he's gone. Heart attack, they said. But the timing, like a wrench in the spokes. Noah limped over, easing into a chair with a soft grunt, the prosthetic clicking faintly against the leg. "Saw it coming," he added, voice rumbling low like an idling engine. "Tom confided in me after a meeting. Said the pressure was mounting. Evictions like yours, Sarah, not random. They're clearing land for some development scam, pushing out folks who won't play ball. Your place sits on a sweet spot, old Harlan land with water rights." The words landed like gravel under tires, stirring the dust of suspicion Sarah had buried under grief. Tom's late nights, the hushed calls she'd overheard, fragments now forming a picture of a man caught between loyalty and a noose tightening from the shadows. The back door creaked open, letting in a rush of crisp air that smelled of untouched snow and the faint metallic bite of morning frost. Lucas and Grace entered, cheeks ruddy from checking the perimeter, saddlebags slung over shoulders heavy with purpose. Grace carried a thermos fresh from the bikes, pouring refills as she spoke. "Perimeter's clear, but tracks from last night lead toward the commissioner's office. We can ride out at first light, shake some trees." Her tone was practical, the medic's calm masking the fire in her eyes that had patched more than wounds, mending the fractures in souls adrift on endless roads. Sarah's grip tightened on the mug, the warmth seeping into her palms like a promise renewed. "I don't want more trouble. Tom's gone because of trouble like this." But even as she said it, a spark ignited, fanned by the crew's unyielding presence. They weren't invaders. They were the echo of Tom's laugh, the rumble of engines that had once filled this yard with life. Ethan reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers briefly, a gesture rough yet tender, forged in the same fires that had scarred them all. "Trouble finds us, Sarah, but we don't run. The oath is Tom's legacy, chosen family, standing when blood don't. We dig this out, for him, for you." As the sky lightened to a watery pearl, the crew moved with quiet efficiency, voices low, and plans sketched on a napkin like a route map. Noah mapped old contacts, veteran buddies in the county records, nurses who'd seen the commissioner's donations up close. Lucas tuned a radio for chatter, the static crackling like distant thunder, while Grace packed a kit not just for scrapes, but for the long haul of truth-seeking. Sarah stood by the window, watching the snow-glazed world awaken, the trees' lights now pale ghosts in the daylight. The ornament she'd held swayed gently, catching a stray sunbeam, its chrome glint a beacon of endurance. But as they geared up, a low rumble pierced the dawn. Not their engines, but an approaching convoy from the east, headlights cutting the haze like determined blades. Ethan's hand went to his boot knife instinctively, the crew forming a loose line at the porch. The vehicles resolved into a mix, club allies from neighboring chapters, a dozen bikes flanked by a couple of pickups, their beds loaded with documents and grim-faced riders. Leading them was an old-timer named William, a grizzled vet with a patch faded from decades, who'd ridden with Tom in the early days. "Heard the call?" William shouted over the idling roar, dismounting with a nod to Ethan. "Oath's network lit up last night. Got ledgers, witness statements, proof the commissioner's been bleeding the town dry. Time to end the ride." The air thrummed with purpose, the scent of hot metal and resolve mingling with the morning's chill. Sarah stepped out, blanket trailing like a cape, her fear yielding to a quiet strength. This was redemption in motion, not vengeance, but justice carved from loyalty's unbreaking chain. Ethan clapped William on the shoulder, the reunion a silent vow renewed, and the group converged on the porch, maps unrolling amid the crunch of boots. Hargrove's web was unraveling thread by thread, pulled by hands that honored promises older than the roads. Yet as the sun crested the horizon, gilding the snow in fleeting gold, a shadow lingered in Sarah's mind. The cost of this stand, the echoes of Tom's final ride. The crew's laughter broke through, sparse and genuine, as they plotted the confrontation at the commissioner's office. Engines would roar again, not in fury but in unity, a convoy for the light, chasing corruption from the winter's grasp. Inside, the house breathed easier, filled with the hum of family forged in fire, but the day ahead promised trials sharper than any blade. Loyalty wasn't a shield, it was the throttle, pushing forward through the storm's remnants toward a dawn untainted by deceit. The sun climbed higher, its pale winter light filtering through the snow-laden branches like a reluctant witness, casting long shadows across the porch where the Iron Oath crew gathered. The air hummed with the low growl of idling engines, a symphony of Harleys and pickups that vibrated through the frozen ground, carrying the sharp scent of exhaust mingled with the crisp bite of melting frost. Sarah stood at the edge of the steps, her coat pulled tight against the morning chill, watching as Ethan conferred with William under the hood of a battered truck. Ledgers and papers spilled from the bed like secrets unearthed from a grave, their edges curling in the damp air. The house behind her felt alive now. The tree's lights switched off, but its presence a steady warmth, ornaments still swaying faintly from the night's disturbances. Ethan straightened, wiping grease from his hands on a rag that smelled of oil and resolve, his eyes scanning the horizon where Willow Creek's rooftops poked through the white veil. "We ride together," he said, voice cutting through the rumble like a clear signal over static. No charges, no standoffs, just truth laid bare. "Commissioner's office opens in an hour. We show what we've got. Let the light do the work." William nodded, his grizzled face creased with the lines of countless dawns, clapping a hand on Noah's shoulder. The veteran grinned faintly, prosthetic legs steady as he mounted his bike, the chrome catching the sun in a brief flash. Lucas and Grace swung legs over their saddles, her medical bag strapped secure, his youthful energy tempered by the gravity of the moment. Sarah's breath fogged in the cold, her mind racing with fragments of the night. Hargrove's bluster, the commissioner's pale retreat, Tom's voice echoing in her dreams like a distant throttle. She wasn't a rider, never had been, but the pull of this chosen family tugged at her, stronger than the fear knotting her stomach. "I'm coming," she said, stepping forward, her boots crunching the snow. Ethan turned, surprise flickering in his scarred features, but he didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a helmet from his saddlebag, its leather worn smooth from years of protection. "Ride with me," he offered, and she nodded, climbing on behind him, arms wrapping around his waist, the solid feel of leather and muscle an anchor against the uncertainty. The convoy formed, a steel serpent uncoiling from the yard. 20 bikes now, bolstered by allies from distant chapters, their patches gleaming like badges of honor under the strengthening sun. Engines roared to life in unison, a thunder that shook loose snow from the eaves, drowning out the world's hush. They rolled out, tires carving dark paths through the drifts, the scent of gasoline trailing like a banner. Willow Creek unfolded before them, modest homes giving way to the squat brick of the town square, where the commissioner's office squatted like a fortress of faded authority. Pedestrians paused, eyes widening at the procession, whispers rippling like wind through dry grass. They pulled up in a disciplined arc, engines cutting off with a final sigh that left the air ringing. Ethan dismounted first, helping Sarah down, her legs unsteady, but her chin lifted. The crew fanned out, not aggressively, but with the quiet presence of men and women who knew the weight of oaths. William carried the ledgers under one arm, Noah at his side, while Grace and Lucas flanked Sarah, a protective cordon woven from loyalty. The office door swung open before they reached it, the commissioner emerging with Hargrove in tow, faces drawn tight as bowstrings. Deputies hovered nearby, hands twitching, but the morning light exposed their unease. The bikers' numbers, the documents in hand, turning bluster to brittle facade. "You've got nerve showing here," the commissioner snarled, his tailored coat flapping in the breeze, voice pitched for show but undercut by the tremor in his stance. Hargrove lurked behind, eyes darting like a cornered fox, the cigar scent replaced by the sour tang of sweat. Ethan stepped forward, boots planted firm on the salted sidewalk, the sun warming his back. "Nerve? We're here for justice, not games. Tom's death, these evictions. Your web's tangled, but it's unraveling." He nodded to William, who laid the papers on a nearby bench, pages fluttering open to reveal scrawled entries. Kickbacks funneled through fake liens, names of squeezed families like Sarah's marked in red. Witnesses' statements followed, veterans' affidavits, nurses' logs of donations that never reached the needy. The commissioner scanned them, color draining from his face, the winter sun merciless on his pallor. "This is harassment, illegal assembly." But his words faltered as townsfolk gathered, drawn by the murmur, phones held high, capturing the scene. A murmur rose, recognition of familiar injustices. The widow next door, the vet foreclosed on last spring. Noah spoke up, voice steady as an old engine. "Harassment? Try theft. Tom's heart gave out under your pressure, refused your dirty haul, paid with his life. We ride clean for the forgotten. You prey on 'em." Grace added her piece, calm and cutting. "I've patched the fallout, broken homes, hollow eyes. This ends now." Hargrove shifted, mumbling denials, but the commissioner's resolve cracked like thin ice. He glanced at the deputies, who averted their eyes, one even stepping back toward the office. The air thickened with the scent of thawing snow and shifting power, the convoy's presence a silent testament. No fists raised, just truth unveiled under the open sky. "Fine," the commissioner muttered finally, voice a rasp. "The evictions voided, debts cleared, but this stays quiet." Ethan shook his head, the beard framing a firm line. "No deals. You resign, face the light. For Tom, for all of them." The standoff stretched, minutes feeling like miles, until the commissioner sagged, nodding to an aide who scurried inside. By noon, word spread, resignation drafted, investigations promised by a higher office. The web's threads snapping one by one. Hargrove slunk away alone, his truck vanishing down a side street, the echo of defeat in its sputter. The crew lingered only long enough to see Sarah's name struck from the rolls, her home secured not by cash, but by the unyielding chain of honor. As they rode back, the sun high and forgiving, Sarah clung to Ethan, the wind whipping tears from her eyes, not of sorrow but release. The house welcomed them, the tree a sentinel of lights reignited against the afternoon glow. The crew gathered one last time, mugs refilled with fresh coffee, stories flowing freer now, laced with the quiet triumph of promises kept. Ethan raised his cup, eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. Tom's riding with us still, family chosen, stronger than any storm. Noah chuckled, prosthetic tapping a rhythm on the floor. And the road, it goes on. But today, we won a mile. Laughter rippled, Grace's hand on Lucas's, William sharing a tale from the early days. Sarah felt the weight lift, the scars of loss softened by this circle, forged in chrome and courage. Outside, snow melted into rivulets, carrying away the winter's grip, while inside, redemption bloomed, not in grand gestures, but in the steady hum of loyalty, a legacy etched in every heartbeat. As evening fell, the convoy dispersed, engines fading into the dusk like echoes of gratitude. Sarah stood on the porch, waving until the last taillight blurred, the air cool and clean. Tom's promise, long buried, now lived in the light, a beacon for the chosen, against the shadows that dared return. In Willow Creek, justice rode silent, but sure, mile after unbreaking mile. Thank you for joining us on this journey of promises and unbreakable bonds. If these tales of redemption and chosen family resonate with you, please subscribe for more stories that honor the road less traveled.